Whenever somebody makes a really big mistake in any kind of large and complex negotiation, they generally don't tend to find out about it until it is too late. So this is why I always stress it is absolutely critical that any negotiator does a lot of preparation and really brings a rather large amount of critical analysis into that preparation and into the negotiation. So what you will find with experienced negotiators is they will twist and turn every single angle, every single issue to try and find holes in it. And that is because experience will have taught them that if they've missed anything, then it may well come back to bite them later on. So I thought I would explore a potential question of whether a really big negotiation, whether they miss something, and whether to come back to bite them. Now the theme I picked is HBO Max, their home box office, their TV streaming service, based in the UK or originating from the US, originating from the US. So they're really big, they're very famous, they've got some well-known shows, of which one of the most famous is Game of Thrones. So here they are, a streaming service in the 2021, when streaming shows and films and so on is a massive market, and they are coming to Europe. This is the new announcement on the 26th of October, but not all of Europe. They're only going to be going into 6 countries initially, and they will be expanding to more European countries next year. But quite significantly, HBO Max is not going to be launched in the UK, Germany, France, and Italy. And this looks statistically significant. I mean, these are perhaps the biggest, TV show and film markets in Europe, arguably. And HBO Max is not even going to touch them until 2025. So what's going on? And the question we should always ask ourselves is why? Why have HBO Max put themselves in the position of denying themselves a rather large numbers of customers and of course revenue? Well, let's go back to what we do know. Let's look at some facts of the matter. We do know, on a bit of research, that HBO and Warner Media, which is sort of the overarching company, signed a deal with Sky in 2019. Now, this deal with HBO and then later on Warner Media, but the deal between HBO and Sky had been going on for quite a long time, since 2010, and they signed another one in 2014, I believe. So they extended something that they already had. And at the time, HBO had a policy that they were basically US based, and they would license out their output to the European providers who had all the infrastructure, all the capability, and would pay them the license fee, the deal for airing their shows. But of course, those providers would be the one collecting the income from their subscribers. So what is significant about the 2019 deal is the element of exclusivity. And that's a big deal in any negotiation. When someone demands or is granted exclusivity, that's a very significant thing. That gives them a lot of power. Exclusivity. So exclusivity is something you never negotiate away lightly. And you always have to ask yourself, in whose interest is this exclusivity, and does it make sense? Because quite often you will find exclusivity can actually be quite unbalanced. They can be in favour of one party, not both parties. And there certainly was a bit of comment on this deal that HBO had been willing to extend for 5 years, which is quite a long time. This looks especially foolish when HBO Max was then launched in 2020, and this was known in 2019. So we can find ourselves asking a bit of the awkward question of, if you were negotiating with Sky for an exclusivity deal, why would you agree to a 5-year deal knowing that your own streaming platform was launching internationally the following year? So these are interesting questions. Now, digging a little bit into some of the media reports, it was reported that Warner Media had even this year explored the option of an early exit from that deal, but gave up. And no doubt an element of that would be that this exclusivity is a big revenue earner for Sky, especially in the UK. So Sky would not allow an early exit from that contract without paying some pretty hefty penalty fees. They gain an awful lot of subscribers from being able to air, for example, Game of Thrones and some of the other big HBO programs. So you can see that perhaps from that report that their parent company, Warner Media, had second thoughts about this deal only a year later. And of course, hindsight's a wonderful thing. I mean, in 2020, the pandemic hit, and pretty much everyone was stuck at home, and subscriptions and use of subscription and streaming services absolutely mushroomed. But of course, you could not have predicted that in 2019. So, what else do we know, perhaps, or can speculate about that 2019 deal? Well, I did see one report that said that the parent company for both HBO and Warner Media is AT&T, and they are quite heavily in debt, so they badly need the cash. Now, this is unverified. I may be speculating too far here as to this being the true motivation, but it is important to think about things like this in any negotiation. If you're asking yourself, why does someone negotiate such a bad deal, or a deal that perhaps wasn't fully in their interest, there usually is some kind of wider consideration. And in this case, we can perhaps speculate that the overarching parent company had cash problems and basically sacrificed HBO's potential future earnings for that short-term cash injection that Sky promised. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't able to find out what exactly it was that Sky did pay for this deal. If anyone is able to find any figures, please do put them in the comments, because I would be really interested to know that. But by the looks of it, those figures were not published. So let's speculate a little bit that if HBO Max had launched in the UK or in Europe, what sort of revenue could they perhaps have earned by not being tied into Sky? Well, we can have to look at the competitors to see that. And I'm conscious that these are not accurate figures. These are estimated figures, and also you cannot make true predictions that HBO Max would have generated this much income or been the exact same product of what's being stated here. But it's interesting to do a bit of comparison and contrasting. So Disney Plus, that launched in a big way end of 2019 and really mushroomed in 2020. And obviously that's a big year, great year to be launching a new streaming service. So the reported figures we've got that Disney Plus made $4.5 billion in 2020, and this is projected to double, or more than double, to $10 billion in 2021. The total Disney revenues, so that's all the Disney's products, not just Disney Plus, in Europe in 2020 was reported to be $7.9 billion. So that's how much money Disney Plus made. Now I'm conscious that it's not clear at how much money they made in the UK. Unfortunately, those figures were not clearly available. But the launch of that streaming service across Europe, shall we say, is probably a fair few billion worth dollars, I think it's safe to say, in terms of revenue. So perhaps we'll look at some of the other established players in the market. And again, we got a reported figure that Netflix reported $1.3 billion worth of revenue in the UK alone in 2019. Now, of course, it is unrealistic to assume that HBO Max could launch straight into the UK market in 2020 and come close to making $1 billion in its first year. But I don't think they would have been too far off, and certainly across Europe, they might not be making quite as much as Disney Plus, but we're talking a few billions here, and we're talking about a 5-year deal with Sky. Does that equate to perhaps a projected revenue of 5 billion across Europe, maybe? Who knows? So looking perhaps at a different provider, we have Amazon Prime TV, and they were reported making 505 million in the UK in 2019. Now, of course, Amazon is not necessarily particularly known for TV content, although they do have quite a lot of very well known and popular TV content. So let's take this as perhaps the lower end of what HBO could possibly have made if they had launched in the UK in 2020. So if we imagine that as being their potential income over 5 years, then you're looking at something like $2.5 billion. Now, as I said, I don't know what Sky paid HBO in that exclusivity deal. But does it mean that by being exclusive to Sky, HBO have passed up the opportunity to obtain somewhere between 500 and $1 billion worth of revenue per year? Has that 5-year deal cost them perhaps somewhere between $2.5 to $5 billion in potential revenue, right at a time when you really want to be signing up new customers? And bearing in mind that Disney Plus alone, in the short time it has launched, has signed up over 100 million subscribers. Netflix has over 200 million subscribers. I don't know how many Amazon have. I'm assuming a fairly decent number. So you have to ask yourself that by being 5 years late to the party, will all those subscribers be in a position of yippee, something new? Or will they be, we've already got our subscription, we already pay for maybe 2 or even 3 of these providers? Is there room to add a fourth? We don't know. We can only speculate here. But it does pose some interesting questions. Which the big one, obviously, it has HBO screwed up. Should they have negotiated that 5-year exclusivity deal with Sky? Now, I don't know the answer to that. I can only speculate, and there's a lot of information that's missing here. But what we can see is the importance of good preparation and having good data and good information before you go anywhere near a negotiation. If HBO perhaps had had these projections in their back pocket when they were going to negotiate with Sky back in 2019, would they have struck that deal? Would they have perhaps said, or driven the price up? They may have, demanded more money. We don't know what they demanded. They may have even demanded an end to exclusivity or breakout clauses. They may have also not agreed 5 whole years, maybe 1 or 2 years worth of a deal, in order to give them that flexibility to be able to launch HBO Max. But nothing said they couldn't have gone for a 2-year deal and then extended again later if they decided they weren't ready to launch in the UK or in Europe. So we have to ask ourselves a little bit, what were the drivers behind the negotiations behind this deal? For Sky, it's obvious. This is a huge revenue stream. HBO content is extremely popular. For Sky, it's a no-brainer. You want this. You want their programs, and you want to have this exclusivity, this lock-in, so that UK subscribers, just to name the UK market alone, can only obtain it from Sky. They can't go direct to any other provider, including HBO. So why would HBO agree to that? Did they take the view that they badly needed money and anything would do? Did they perhaps take the view that with all the previous years' worth of deals they've had with Sky, that this was a good thing and this should be maintained? Did they perhaps sacrifice their potential future revenue for the sake of sentimentality or for, maintaining the status quo? Because that can be a driver. People can not want the hassle or the change and be quite happy. They may even go a little bit further, speculating here, that the HBO deal with Guy wasn't just for the output, it was also production, the studio production, and they co-produced with Guy that very successful drama Chernobyl. So they may have taken the view that there were wider consideration, not just revenue, not just output, but actually being able to create good future TV content. That may have been a driver for them agreeing the 5-year deal. We don't know. But I think a key lesson that we can draw from this example is that whatever you do negotiate, it has long-term consequences and outcomes. And if you've done something wrong, or if you've not properly analysed your position, then you usually tend to find out afterwards, when it's a bit too late, and then you have that little bit of buyer's remorse and regret. That was reported by the fact that Warner Media wanted to exit out of this contract early. This hints to me that this is what has happened to them. So, how do you counter stuff like that? Do you push back on things like exclusivity? Do you even go for shorter contract terms? And when you have those sorts of uncertainties, then having increased flexibility is not a bad thing. And it's always a trade-off. How much are you willing to commit? How much do you need to be flexible and loose and with suitable breakout clauses? And by the looks of it, HBO have hamstrung themselves, whether intentionally, whether accidentally, and it's going to cost them. Let me know what you think of this, and if you've got any further information or data that would help inform this discussion, that would be very helpful.